It started on a cold winter evening, the kind where the air bites at your skin, and the streets are covered in a thin layer of frost. Dr. James Carter was just about to close up his small veterinary clinic when the front door swung open, letting in a gust of icy wind. A woman, bundled in an old coat with frayed sleeves, hurried inside, clutching a small bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket. Her eyes were wide with desperation. "Please," she gasped, barely able to catch her breath. "He's not moving. I don't know what to do." Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and carefully pulled back the blanket, revealing a golden retriever, still, limp, and barely breathing. His fur was matted, his ribs visible beneath his thinning coat. The vet could tell at a glance that the dog was in bad shape, but he didn't ask any questions. He just acted. "Come with me," he said firmly, leading the woman to the exam room. As he worked, checking the dog's pulse, listening to its labored breathing, he stole a glance at the woman. Her hands were trembling, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, fear, worry. There was something in her eyes that told him this dog wasn't just a pet. He was family. "What's his name?" Dr. Carter asked, keeping his voice calm. "Charlie," she whispered. "He's my son's best friend." That's when Dr. Carter noticed the small boy standing just behind her, maybe 7 or 8 years old, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. His face was pale, his eyes glassy. He looked like he was holding back tears with everything he had. Dr. Carter turned his attention back to Charlie. The dog was weak, dehydrated, and clearly malnourished. He needed treatment, possibly surgery, and that meant money. Money this family probably didn't have. Dr. Carter had seen cases like this before, where people were forced to choose between feeding themselves and caring for their pets. "How long has he been sick?" he asked gently. The woman hesitated. "A while," she admitted. "I tried everything, but Her voice broke. "I didn't know where else to go." Dr. Carter saw the way she gripped her son's hand. He saw the way the boy kept his eyes on Charlie, silently pleading with the universe to let his best friend stay. It was in that moment that Dr. Carter made a decision, one that he knew would come with consequences, but one that he couldn't turn away from. "Don't worry about the cost," he said. "Let's just focus on saving Charlie." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing, just nodded, her grip on her son tightening. For the next few hours, Dr. Carter and his small team worked tirelessly. They rehydrated Charlie, stabilized his condition, and monitored him closely. The dog was weak, but he was a fighter. Every now and then, his tail gave a faint wag, as if he was holding on, just like the little boy sitting outside the exam room, refusing to leave his side. As the night wore on, Dr. Carter stepped out to check on the mother and son. The woman was sitting on the edge of a chair, hands clasped together as if in prayer. The boy, his exhaustion finally catching up with him, had curled up on a small bench, his head resting on his mother's lap. "He's going to be okay," Dr. Carter assured her. "It'll take some time, but he's strong." The relief on the woman's face was immediate. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to hold back more tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice shaking. Dr. Carter just smiled. "Take care of him. That's thanks enough." Charlie stayed at the clinic for several more days, regaining his strength little by little. And when the time finally came for him to go home, the little boy practically jumped out of his seat with joy. Wrapping his arms around the golden retriever's neck, Charlie wagged his tail wildly, licking the boy's face, as if he, too, knew how lucky he was to still be here. Before they left, the woman tried to offer Dr. Carter what little money she had, but he refused. "Just promise me one thing," he said. Take care of each other." And with that, they walked out the door, Charlie trotting beside them, his tail high in the air. Years passed. Dr. Carter never forgot about them, but life moved on. He continued his work, helping animals, running his little clinic. The memory of that night became just one of many acts of kindness in his long career. Until one day, a letter arrived. At first, it seemed like just another envelope in the stack of mail on his desk, nothing unusual. But as he opened it and read the words inside, he felt his breath catch in his throat. "Dr. Carter, you may not remember me, but years ago, you saved a dog named Charlie when my family had nowhere else to turn. I never forgot what you did for us, and now it's my turn to give something back." Dr. Carter read the letter twice, his heartbeat quickening, and then he noticed something else, something tucked inside the envelope. A small key. What could this possibly mean? Little did he know, his act of kindness all those years ago was about to come full circle in a way he never could have imagined. Dr. Carter turned the small key over in his hand. His mind racing, he looked back at the letter, reading it once, more, trying to make sense of what was happening. The handwriting was neat, but had a slight shake to it, like someone had written it with deep emotion. The name at the bottom was unfamiliar, but something about the words felt oddly familiar. He sat back in his chair, thinking about that night so many years ago. The desperate mother, the quiet little boy, the frail golden retriever who had barely clung to life. He had helped them, expecting nothing in return, and now someone from that past was reaching out to him. But why? And what was the key for? Curiosity gnawed at him. He flipped the envelope over, searching for any additional clues. But there was nothing else. No return address, no instructions. Just the letter and the key. The mystery lingered in his mind for days. Between appointments, he found himself staring at the letter, rereading every word, trying to remember every detail about the family he had helped. But memories had a way of fading over time, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't recall their names. Then one afternoon, a call came in. Dr. Carter, a woman's voice, warm but unfamiliar. "Yes, this is him. I believe you received my letter." There was a pause, as if she was giving him a moment to catch up. "I wanted to make sure it reached you." Dr. Carter sat up straighter. "Yes, I got it, but He hesitated. "I don't understand. The key? What is it for?" The woman exhaled softly. "It's for something that belongs to you now." Another pause. "Would you be willing to meet me?" There was something in her voice, a quiet sincerity, a sense of unfinished business. Dr. Carter felt his pulse quicken. He didn't know what he was walking into, but something told him this was important. "Where?" he asked. She gave him an address in a part of town he wasn't familiar with. When he arrived the next morning, he found himself standing in front of a modest but well-kept building. A small sign above the door that read, "Carter's Haven." His heart stopped. His name was on the building. Before he could process what was happening, the door swung open and a woman stepped out. She was in her mid-30s, her dark hair pulled into a simple ponytail, her eyes warm yet filled with something unspoken. She studied him for a moment before offering a small smile. "You really don't remember me, do you?" she asked. Dr. Carter hesitated, searching her face, trying to place her. Then, like a sudden rush of warmth on a cold day, the memory hit him. It was her, the desperate mother, from all those years ago. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, she gestured for him to follow her inside. As soon as he stepped in, he was overwhelmed. The place was filled with the sound of barking, soft meows, and the shuffling of paws. It wasn't just a building, it was a shelter. Rows of kennels lined the walls, each one housing a rescued dog or cat. Volunteers moved about, feeding the animals, cleaning up, offering gentle words and affection. There was an energy in the air, something Dr. Carter recognized instantly. Hope, this place, he murmured. What is this? The woman turned to him, her expression filled with gratitude. It's yours, she said softly. He looked at her bewildered. Mine? She nodded. Years ago when you saved Charlie, you didn't just save a dog. You saved my son's best. Friend, you gave us hope when we had none. She glanced around the shelter. I never forgot what you did for us. And when I finally got back on my feet, I knew I wanted to do something that would carry on your kindness. Dr. Carter felt a lump form in his throat. My son, she continued, her voice filled with emotion. He grew up wanting to help animals. Because of you, he's the one who started this shelter. He named it after you. Dr. Carter swallowed hard. Where is he now? She smiled. He's waiting to meet you. At that moment, a young man stepped out from a back room. He was tall now, maybe in his early 20s. But there was something instantly recognizable about him. The same deep brown eyes. The same quiet but intense presence. Dr. Carter, the young man said, his voice steady, but filled with something unspoken. It's an honor to finally see you again. Dr. Carter felt his chest tighten. The last time he had seen this boy, he had been just a child, clinging to his mother's side, his eyes full of silent pleading as he watched over a sick golden retriever. Dr. Carter took a deep breath. You were just a kid. The young man smiled. And you were the man who changed my life. A silence fell between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Then the young man reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A small weathered collar tag. Charlie's tag. Dr. Carter's breath caught. I kept it, the young man said. I wanted to remember him, and I wanted to remember the man who gave me more time with him. He held out the tag. And now I want you to have it. Dr. Carter took it, his fingers trembling slightly as he traced the worn edges. He could still remember the way Charlie had wagged his tail that night, the way he had looked up at the boy, as if promising he wouldn't leave him. He looked back at the shelter, at the animals waiting for homes, at the people working to give them a second chance. A place built in his name, a place built from kindness. He turned back to the young man and his mother, his heart full. I don't know what to say, he admitted. The young man grinned. Then don't say anything. Just help us keep making a difference. Dr. Carter let out a soft laugh, shaking his head in amazement. He glanced down at the small key still in his hand. Then I guess it's time to unlock a new chapter. And as he stepped further into the shelter, surrounded by wagging tails and hopeful eyes, he realized something. Kindness had a way of coming back, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Dr. Carter stepped deeper into the shelter, his heart still processing everything. The thought that someone had built an entire rescue in his name, inspired by a single act of kindness so many years ago, felt surreal. He ran his fingers over the small key in his palm, still unsure what it was meant to unlock. The young man, Ethan, watched him with a quiet smile. Come with me, he said. Dr. Carter followed him through a hallway lined with photos. He slowed as he noticed them, framed pictures of happy families, holding adopted pets, before and after images of dogs and cats who had been rescued and given second chances. And then, near the center of the wall, he saw it, a photo of Charlie, the golden retriever, sat proudly in the picture, his fur full and healthy, his eyes bright with life. Next to him, a much younger Ethan knelt, his arms wrapped tightly around his best friend. Beneath the image, a small plaque read, Charlie's Legacy, a place for second chances. Dr. Carter swallowed the lump in his throat. Ethan gave him a moment before speaking again. I started this place a few years ago. My mom helped, of course. We wanted to make sure no one ever had to go through what we did, having to choose between feeding themselves and saving their best friend. Dr. Carter turned to him. And the key? Ethan hesitated, then gestured toward a door at the end of the hall. I think you should see for yourself. With growing curiosity, Dr. Carter stepped forward and fit the key into the lock. As the door creaked open, sunlight spilled into the room, illuminating what was inside. And then he saw him, a golden retriever. For a split second, his breath caught, his mind flashing back to Charlie. But this wasn't the same dog. He was younger, with a slightly darker coat, his tail thumping the ground excitedly as he stared up at Dr. Carter. Ethan chuckled at the stunned expression on Dr. Carter's face. His name's Chance. He explained. We rescued him a few months ago. He'd been abandoned, scared, unsure of people. He paused. But he's been waiting for the right home. Dr. Carter looked at Ethan, trying to understand what was happening. Ethan smiled. Charlie was my best friend. You gave me more time with him than I ever could have hoped for. And now, I want you to have a best friend too. Dr. Carter turned back to the dog. Chance stood, wagging his tail slowly, his warm brown eyes filled with curiosity. I don't know, Dr. Carter murmured. I haven't had a dog in years. Ethan shrugged. Maybe it's time. Chance took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he was right in front of Dr. Carter. Gently, the dog nudged his hand, as if he already knew that they belonged to each other. Dr. Carter let out a soft chuckle, crouching down and running his fingers through Chance's fur. The dog leaned into him instantly, letting out a contented sigh. At that moment, something in Dr. Carter's heart shifted. He had spent years giving to others, healing their pets, offering kindness without expecting anything in return. And now, kindness had found its way back to him. He looked up at Ethan, smiling through the emotion welling in his chest. You really didn't have to do this. Ethan grinned. I know, but I wanted to. Dr. Carter took a deep breath, then gave Chance a gentle scratch behind the ears. Well, he said, I guess it's time to take a chance on Chance. The dog let out a happy bark, and Ethan laughed. I think he likes the sound of that. As Dr. Carter stood with Chance by his side, he realized that life had come full circle. The kindness he had given so freely all those years ago had returned in ways he never could have expected. And now, as he walked through the shelter one last time, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. A sense of home. Some acts of kindness fade over time, but others, they ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one can predict. And sometimes they come back to you in the form of a wagging tail and a second chance,